Hello and welcome to Crandon Park. Crandon Park is a park within the Miami-Dade County Parks, Recreation and Open Spaces Department. Today we're going to do a virtual tour of Cub Preserve. That's the preserve located at the northern end of Key Biscayne within Crandon Park. My name is Ed Pritchard. I'm with Miami Eco Adventures. We're the interpretive unit with the Miami-Dade County Parks, Rec and Open Spaces Department. I lead the program specifically here within Crandon. Today's virtual tour, we're going to start out in our Dune Ecosystem. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about some of the species that we have within this preserve. Starting off, we have our sea grapes. These are a species that you often see within the back part of the dune, what we consider the back dune, right along the edges of our hardwood hammock. So the Cub Preserve really is one of the last vestiges of coastal ecosystems within South Florida. A lot of these areas have been developed along our coastlines, and so here in Cub Preserve you get a really good idea of what these ecosystems look like and some of the inhabitants of this ecosystem. So the sea grape here, this is a very popular species that you might see growing along the beaches as you make your way down to the sand. These species are very hardy. They have a lot of adaptations for living in this zone that's very salty, and there's a lot of strong winds and different things that can that influence this ecosystem. So these sea grapes, they have these really thick, hardy leaves. A lot of times when we're working with young children within the park, we talk to them about how you can use these leaves and write on them and then put a stamp on them and put them in the mail. So the sea grape has its namesake, the fruit. As you can see growing on these stalks, you can see a few of these other stalks growing out. So they start ripening in the middle of the summer. They'll kind of turn into a darker green or purplish color. And people do use them for jams and jellies. Definitely as a kid, I have memories of going, and we had sea grapes in around our yard, and we'd pick the fruit, and a lot of the neighbors would, as they dropped to the ground, they would stain the asphalt. So we would collect those before they would drop and make them into jams and jellies. But they're also really popular with a lot of the wildlife that lives within the hardwood hammock and the dune, such as raccoons and birds and whatnot. So we would have these important fruits for those species as well. Another species that we can see growing here, there's one over here. Something that you don't want to really come into contact with, but is a native to our hardwood hammocks here in Bear Cut, is this plant right here. This is called poisonwood. As the name suggests, it actually is in the same family as poison oak and ivy. And the way you can distinguish it, it has a very distinct leaf pattern and structure. You can see that these leaves have almost a drip tip, so it comes to a point at the end. And then they have these characteristic yellow, the lines on the leaf here. And again, they can grow kind of lower to the ground in shrubs, but they can grow into large trees as well. You can also see they do fruit in the summertime. They have a orangish fruit. There's some down here. And so these plants, you don't want to obviously touch or stand underneath, as that poison can cause a very painful rash. So that is one plant that is a native to South Florida, and often you find it in the hardwood hammocks and the dune. So here we have another species that you often find, not just in our hardwood hammocks and our dunes, but oftentimes you'll see them growing farther inland. This one is called the cocoa plum. As you can see, it has these fruits. They are a few different colors. They start off as a green and yellowish color, and then as they ripen towards the end of the summer, you can see this pinkish white fruit, and this one actually has been munched on. So we have a lot of the animals that I spoke about, raccoons, smaller mammals, even insects. and birds love to feed on these cocoa plum fruits. This plant is very indicative of these dune ecosystems. You can see the color change in the leaves as well, or not, I don't know. But yeah, so these plants are often growing. The fruits will be in the summertime, but in the fall, their leaves often change to a more purplish color. So another species that is actually our state tree of Florida is the Sable Palm. These trees have a great importance not just for these ecosystems, but has historical and cultural significance. Miami-Dade's first indigenous peoples, the Tequesta tribes, would use this tree for a number of purposes. As you can see, the fronds here are pretty thick. They would use these to thatch the roofs of their shelters. They would also use the trunks as lumber to build the structure itself. The interior of the palm, what's called the heart of palm, they would use that as a food source, as well as these fronds. As you can see, they come to very thin strand at the end of the frond. They would use this and tie it together and use it as rope and twine. So you can kind of, it's pretty tough once it's been woven together. And so this was really helpful for them, not just tying the parts of their structure, but for a lot of other uses as well. But this palm, it does grow shorter to the ground, but it can also grow into taller trees. We see these all across Florida, not just in our coastal ecosystems, but they do serve a really important role in these ecosystems. And they also provide habitat for a number of species. Oftentimes you'll see even when they're alive, not just when they're alive, but also when they're dead, they can be an important home for a couple species that we find here in South Florida, including the red-bellied woodpecker. So the red-bellied woodpecker, they build their nests inside of hollowed out trunks of these sable palms. So as you can see, they'll basically drill a hole into the side and dig it, drill out a chamber for their nest. And they'll have their fledglings inside of that nest, and you'll see them coming in and out to feed them. But they do rely upon these dead sable trunks in order to find a suitable nest. So here in Cub Preserve, we have a number of trails that run through the preserve. This area is designated as a passive use area, so there are trails that are used by bikers and hikers. They are designated. We have fencing, but it really is managed so that there's very little impact from man to preserve that ecosystem and all of the fragile plants and animals that we have in here. As you can see, these trails run through the preserve and really give you an up-close and personal experience with nature. So as we progress down the trails here on the north end of Cub Preserve, we move into a different ecosystem. So this is more of a salt marsh ecosystem, so you'll start to see more grasses and smaller shrub-like plants. So we have things like cordgrass and sedges. There's a species called Spartina, which you can see growing along here. You also have some of the hardier wood species, such as the white mangrove and the buttonwood, which is a mangrove associate species. And we also find we still see some of the trees such as the sea grape. Again, these are very adapted as well to that salty environment. They can really withstand quite a beating from stronger winds that you might find as those winds progress over the beach onto the dune and back into these areas such as the salt marsh. And again, our sable palm species as well. This habitat is also very popular for some of our bird species here in South Florida. Oftentimes when you come out here in Cub Preserve, walk along the trails in the mornings, you'll see not just songbirds such as the Florida prairie warbler, but things such as wading birds. So you'll often see things like yellow-crowned night herons, egrets, and even white ibis. So as you can see, some sable palms, as they're younger, they look a bit different. you'll see these really tough fronds left over from the fronds, and they sprout new fronds right from the center here. Again, we talked about that heart of palm, so that the new shoots come right out of the center there. But again, these also provide good habitat for you know, smaller animals, smaller critters. And again, you can find this really tough twine kind of right at the base of these fronds. And this is, a lot of people call it monkey hair. But again, it can be used for, if you're building a fire, it's really good, almost like kindling that you can put underneath the fire. Really helps catch the fire. So here we are at the very north end of the Cub Preserve trails. We're about to enter our boardwalk onto our mangrove ecosystem. Cuts right through, so you get to see that transition from white to red as we get closer to the water. But oftentimes I'll be walking along here. There's quite a bit of life living underneath. You have things like raccoons, a lot of crabs. So we see a lot of different species here, such as the fiddler crab and the blue crab. They dig little burrows that go underneath and into the really thick peat underneath the boardwalk here and where our mangroves start. You can also see there's definitely evidence within the preserve of fire. We saw that earlier with the sable palms. Fire is a natural part of some of the ecosystems that you find in Crandon Park. Really important to ecosystems like the pine rocklands, but also important for these areas as well. Oh, there was a night heron. It's very peace and quiet back here. You have quite, the mangroves do a really good job at preventing that wind from moving inland. And you can definitely hear the insects we see, especially here in the summertime, the cicadas. And quite a lot of crab activity over here. So as we move down the boardwalk, we come to this very beautiful overlook that looks out onto the Atlantic and Bear Cut. And you'll see this really unique structure here that's coming off of the north end of the island. It kind of looks like a limestone or something, but it's actually a very unique structure. It's one of only two in the world. It's a fossilized mangrove reef. So this formed, as you can see, the mangrove ecosystem comes right up and along the preserve here and along the cut. It used to extend out quite a bit farther into the cut. Those mangroves, about 6,000 years ago, a storm came through and took a lot of the sand off of these sandbars that you're seeing and dumped it on top of those mangroves. And those roots, with the pressure and oftentimes in a mangrove ecosystem, and most mangrove ecosystems, that temperature, the moisture, really makes the decomposition process go pretty quickly. But with that specific layer of sand on top, really created an atmosphere where the roots could fossilize. So what you're seeing is both black and white and red mangrove roots being preserved here within this rock structure. And so you can see it extends out quite a bit of ways into the water, but it also underlies a lot of the beach here. Again, it dates back about 6,000 years, and it really provides a lot of habitat, especially at a high tide. A lot of our reef fish come in to find refuge. We found nurse sharks. It's a very popular spot to find queen conchs. These are protected mollusks that we find throughout the Caribbean. They are protected here in the state of Florida, but oftentimes you'll find them all along the reef. You'll also find quite a bit of algae growing, especially when the reef is exposed at low tide. And then, as you can see, it extends around the corner here. Right now we're approaching low tide. You'll see our sandbars. This area, especially right off of the coast of Key Biscayne, it's a dissipative beach, so the waves break offshore. It's different than places like Miami Beach, where those waves are breaking right onshore, more of a reflective beach. And so you have this really great spot where you can find places to comb the sand flats and little tide pools created within the fossilized reef. Now again, this area is a preserve, so these areas that we just traveled upon, the trails are open, but this area is really passive use. So you see there are boats that are allowed to anchor right offshore, but the reef is protected. Now we do find there is a red mangrove growing right on top of the reef. That looks like it's a young mangrove, but it's actually about 25 years old. It's just stunted because it's growing on an inopportune type of soil, not really getting a lot of nutrients, but that one's withstood quite a few storms. But the fossilized reef is really great for a great place to snorkel and see some of the marine life that are featured here within Key Biscayne. So you might be wondering how Bear Cut maybe got its name. We don't currently have bears here, but really back in the early 1900s, when the Key was first colonized by settlers, they often found black bears swimming across the channel from the island of Virginia Key over to Key Biscayne, and they were coming over here to forage in a lot of these areas that we're talking about today. We often don't see black bears here much in South Florida anymore. Those habitats have been fragmented, and you'll often see them up in Central Florida. But here we're transitioning from these areas like the hardwood hammock and the salt marsh over into our foredunes. So you're going to start to see these hardier species, like we talked about, the sea grape, the sable palm, start to give way to lower grasses, lower shrubs as we get closer to the beach. Now again, the dunes are very important to not just the ecosystem, but also for protection for humans. So these dunes are a first line of defense. You often have your coral reefs. They do provide that protection, but as soon as you get to land, you have that dune. And that's really taking the brunt of a lot of the, not just on with a storm, a hurricane or a tropical storm, those winds, but even on a high windy day like today, or when you have high surf, all of that's all that energy is being broken up in the dunes. So they do provide that. They also keep the beach stabilized. So those grasses that we're talking about, that you'll see, some of these species, they're holding down that sand in place, and they're keeping that sand on the beach and in the dune, and that's also helping keeping our shoreline stabilized. So some of these grasses, one that I want to point out in particular is the sea oat. You'll see it has these high flags here. So these species, they grow pretty tall, and you can see their roots go down pretty deep, and they're pretty extensive. So that's holding, they go out just like other grasses growing in your front yards with rhizomes. And these little stems run through, they're like little runners that run across the dune here, and then they sprout up in different places. So these grasses, as you can see, are pretty thick right along the edge of where the beach is and where the dune is. You also have a few other species, some pretty flowers. We have these beach sunflowers, and there's looks like a Julia butterfly just hanging out right on top of that plant right there. And again, these grasses provide habitat as well. You have a lot of little insects and crustaceans, even things like mammals like mice that run amongst the dune here. And again, the dune system here in Key Biscayne is pretty extensive. So here we are now down in our intertidal zone. As you'll see, I'm holding two species of seagrass. So the seagrass beds right off of Key Biscayne here are pretty lush. We have two species that are mainly growing. We have our manatee grass, so this thinner blade here. This is, it gets its name as it's a popular food source for our West Indian manatee, and a threatened species here in South Florida. We also have turtle grass, so this thicker blade. This grows pretty extensively throughout South Florida, throughout Biscayne Bay and here on Key Biscayne. This is a popular food source for our green sea turtle. So seagrasses in general provide quite a number of ecosystem benefits. They're really important in terms of water quality. They help filter the water here as it filters out things like pollutants and nutrients and sediment that's in the water. It also provides carbon sequestration, so it removes carbon from the atmosphere. It's said that a hectare of seagrass can remove more carbon than a hectare of tropical rainforest, so they're very important in that regard. And again, they provide quite a bit of habitat, so we find a lot of different species living amongst the seagrass, things like seahorses, some of our echinoderm species, so things like sea cucumbers, sea urchins, and sea stars. And we also find quite extensively these seagrass beds. They hold that the seabed in place and again provide that habitat. Now as that seagrass dies, it does wash up. It's intermingled with our sargassum. But again, this also provides a food source for a lot of our wading birds and our shorebirds. So little critters that they feed on amongst that washes up with this dead seagrass.
Hey guys, I'm Anna Zangroniz, Florida Sea Grant Extension Agent, and I was really lucky to be able to join Ed on your tour of Crandon Park and guest star to talk to you about a couple of topics. I'm going to start by talking about sargassum. Sargassum is a species of macroalgae or large algae or seaweed that's free floating. And here at Crandon Park, you can see that we've got probably 30 or 40 feet of accumulation on the shoreline. And something that a lot of people don't know is that sargassum is a species of macroalgae that originates out in the eastern Atlantic in the Sargasso Sea, and it's transported by currents and prevailing winds until it reaches our coast. However, in the last few years, Florida and the Caribbean have been receiving higher and higher amounts of sargassum. We're not entirely sure as to why this is, but some recent literature has showed that nutrient inputs from even down in the Amazon are contributing to the proliferation of sargassum. Now, this seaweed, it's a natural phenomenon. In and of itself, it is not harmful, it is not toxic, but as you can see, when it's brought in by high tides, if the slope of the beach is not enough, it will remain there even after the tide has gone out. And this is very common here in Crandon Park. So all of this area, the sargassum accumulation is probably 5 or 6 inches deep. You might see me sinking in a little bit. And this is really important habitat for sea turtle hatchlings, juvenile fish, and invertebrates. But on the beach, it causes a lot of uproar because a lot of folks come to Florida for beautiful white beach. But I'm here to tell you that it's a wonderful, really cool organism, and to try not to freak out if you see it. It is a little wet, it is a little squishy, but sargassum, when it comes up and deposits on the beach, is home to all of these animals, and if you take a look and pick up a handful and grab it, you might find young fish or crabs, or you might find things like this hamburger sea bean, which is actually an exotic species that comes from the Amazon and travels throughout the ocean and washes up on our coastlines, and these are considered to be really good luck. if you guys are heading out to the beach and you come into contact and you see all this sargassum, try not to let it bother you, and just remember, as my friends at Miami Eco Adventures say, don't panic, it's organic. Walking here on this little sand flat at low tide is a yellow-crowned night heron. We've been trying to get footage of it since we've been out on the beach, but it has eluded us, so this is a special treat. We often see these in the morning and also in times when the beach is not so crowded, but it definitely utilizes these tidal flat, tidal pool areas that are left behind, or that are more visible and more easily accessible to them at low tide. Here in the Cub Preserve, you might see behind me that we have one marked sea turtle nest. There is sea turtle nesting action not only within the preserve, but further south throughout Crandon Park, as well as the village of Key Biscayne. And Ed and I are fortunate enough to assist with the Miami-Dade County Sea Turtle Conservation Program with morning nesting monitoring surveys. This involves starting very, very early in the morning and monitoring the beach for new nesting activity. So we're looking for the tracks of mama turtles, marking off nests, and at this point in the season, we're also looking for hatching activity or hatch-outs. And since we're here, I wanted to take this opportunity and talk with you a little bit about the marine sea turtles that nest here in Miami-Dade County. There are 7 species of marine turtles in the world. Of those, 3 nest here in Miami. Those are the leatherback, which is the largest species, the loggerhead, and the green. All 7 species are listed under the Endangered Species Act, and therefore the work that is done is performed under very special permits that are administered by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. The reason that we have these monitoring programs is to not only provide protection to the nest itself and its surrounding habitats, but also to try and increase the help naturally is from a hands-off perspective as much as possible to increase the chances of those hatchlings successfully entering the water and growing up. Sea turtles all around the world face numerous threats, both natural and man-caused. Here in South Florida, a lot of their threats have to do with their loss of habitat due to coastal development and construction, but also water quality and overfishing or poaching. And so it's the goal of the program to try and increase the chances of success of sea turtle mothers nesting, as well as those hatchling releases. Here on the beach, we're going to take a walk and take a slightly closer look at one of the nests while we talk a little bit more about this. During sea turtle nesting season, which is April through November, female mature sea turtles come up during the night onto the beach to lay their eggs. And this is happening on the same beach where they were babies, where they were born. And I'm going to give you all an interpretive dance, if you will, of what this looks like. The mother female comes on shore, and she has to use a lot of energy to get up the embankment. You'll see that the slope of this shoreline isn't very great, so this is likely a little bit easier for the mama turtles. So they're crawling, and they're looking for a place above the high tide line to lay their nests. And there's no signage directing them. This is just something that they biologically, instinctively know what to do. So they come up here, they crawl past the sargassum and the rack line. We'll get to that in a minute. They keep looking, they keep looking, until they make their way to an area that they find suitable. In this case, here in the Cub Preserve, this mama turtle came all the way up, almost pretty much to the dune, to lay her nest. Here we are up close and personal with a sea turtle nest. Now, you might notice there are 4 stakes with flagging tape, and this is to mark off the nest and the surrounding area to give them a little bit of a buffer zone to protect the egg chamber. And this is also to mark it so that the public knows that this is a federally protected area, and hopefully they should keep their distance and stay away. There is signage that explains what they're looking at, and all of the nests in Miami-Dade County contain signage that are in English, Spanish, and Creole. People often ask us, when will the babies hatch? And the answer is 45 to 70 days after the nest was laid. And that's why the daily surveying, the monitoring of every nest on the beach is very, very important, because nature, even though it has general parameters, plays by its own rules. So 2 nests that were laid on the same day, one might hatch in 45 days, the other one might hatch in 65 days. Every clutch of eggs, depending on the species, there's an average of 80 to 120 eggs. And the temperature, the incubation period temperature, is what determines the gender or the sex of the baby juvenile turtles. You might hear the expression, hot chicks, cool dudes. That means that the hotter the temperatures were during the incubation period, the more likely a female-heavy nest, versus cooler temperatures might result in more juvenile male turtles. In Bear Cut, there are natural predators of sea turtle nests. It's unfortunate, but it is nature. Those include raccoons, crabs, lizards, and so all of the nests in Bear Cut are protected with screens to help discourage this activity and hopefully, again, improve success of the nest. As the season continues, we begin to monitor for hatchouts, or when the hatchlings emerge from the nest. And the way we tell this is we look for footprints. And it looks like a pot of water boiled and bubbled over. And we'll see dozens of tiny little tracks. They're so cute, remembering that these hatchlings are sometimes only 2 or 3 inches long. And we'll look for those tracks. However, there are some challenges that these hatchlings face when it comes to their emergence from the nest and making their way to the water. And the first and most major disruption towards hatchling success in terms of getting towards the ocean is disorientations. Disorientations occur when the hatchling is distracted, namely by artificial light sources or sky glow. The hatchling is cued to be looking for the moon's reflection on the horizon. However, if there's artificial light coming from a structure or parking lot or street lights, that can disorient those biological cues and make the hatchlings go the wrong way. That's a big one. The other thing that we're looking for in terms of things that can disrupt hatchling success are obstructions like beach furniture and holes. Thinking about, remember, 3 inches, it's a really small little baby. And a lot of folks like to come to the beach and make sandcastles and bury their family members, which is wonderful, but it's really important that when that activity is over, you knock down the sandcastles, fill in those holes to try and give those baby hatchlings a better chance at survival. We also have to think about the hatchlings and their success when it comes to natural obstructions like the sargassum mounds, which are a natural phenomenon, but on a beach that's not treated, it's not managed like this one because this is a preserve, this little sargassum mound, while it might be easy for us to scale, this is a lot of work for that little hatchling, and they're using a lot of energy to try and get over this or over the sandcastles and in the water. So these are things that we have to be really mindful of. Same with when the mother female turtles are coming ashore at night. If there's beach furniture in their way, that might cause them to false crawl or not lay their eggs. Or worse, they could get trapped and be struggling in the beach furniture, which is a really scary thing. So we really hope and we stress to anyone enjoying the beach that they put their beach furniture away at the end of the night. They maintain and fill back in holes and knock down sandcastles, because I tell you, the first time that you ever see a hatchling, you will never forget it, and you want to do everything in your power that you can to help that little animal. Additionally, the Miami-Dade County Sea Turtle Program does do nighttime hatchling release programs where they invite members of the public to come and observe a hatchling release. And that's hatchlings that either didn't make it out of the nest or were found and turned in. They are released back into the beach after darkness to then begin their journey 3 to 11 miles offshore to get into the Gulf Stream so they can begin living their best life.
Thanks so much for joining us here today at Crandon Park and Cub Preserve. We really hope you enjoyed today's program, learned a little bit about these coastal ecosystems, and we hope that you join us sometime soon here at the park. We can't wait to teach you more about these ecosystems and what we can feature here on Key Biscayne. My name is Ed Pritchard. I'm with Miami Eco Adventures. We also had Anna Zangroniz with Miami-Dade Sea Grant. You can follow us in the meantime on social media. And until next time, take care.